Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts.
Hey everybody, we're now accepting applications for a Network Catalyst Accelerator program. Founders in our program have gone on to raise money from Lux, Spark, A16Z, Slow, First Round, SUSE, Homebrew, Mavron, Obvious, NFX, Signalfire, and many more. Learn more and apply at villageglobal.vc/network-catalyst. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Venture Stories by Village Global. I'm here today with two very special guests, repeat guests, Genet of Lumi and Stephan Ango, also of Lumi. Stephan, Jesse, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
I'm also of Lumi. Yes, I appreciate the intro.
Yeah, a thoroughly great introduction by myself. Okay, so this, by the way, all my ad libs are going to be edited out. It's probably my introduction too. Okay, so here's my first question. I know this question for Jesse. Jesse, let's say I have a D2C brand like the next Warby Parker for toothpaste. I have the idea. I want to create it, and then I want to get it to the customer. Walk through how that entire process works in a pre-Lumi and post-Lumi world.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of steps to starting a company. So I don't think I'll start from like the idea formation stage, but let's assume you have a great product. And most founders come up with their idea and they have some sense of how they're going to get the product itself made. Sometimes that's actually part of the inspiration for starting the brand. Like if you're familiar with the founding story of Dollar Shave, he kind of learned about razor manufacturing facility and had access to supply, and that was part of the formation of the brand. So often we find that companies, the founders know how to produce their product. They start figuring out the steps for marketing it and selling it and building a beautiful website and figuring out who their audience is and dialing in their personas. What we typically see is that the aspect of figuring out how the packaging will look, where it will be produced, is often thought of way too late in that process. So something that we'd see in that example, like someone has a Warby Parker for, I think you said toothpaste, is they've got the toothpaste, they've been working on the formulation, they've figured out that like their toothpaste works for humans and dogs, and they've like got the whole marketing strategy nailed down. And then someone like very late in the game realizes that they have to figure out an entire packaging fulfillment strategy. In a pre-Lumi world, that usually starts off as a cascade of phone calls. People calling local partners, Google searching, like, I need boxes, I need this, I need that. And it's kind of rife with issues because as simple as a box might sound, like, oh, I need a box, you need something custom. And it's actually a custom manufactured item. All the unboxing experiences that you see, like take Warby Parker, their home try-on experience is a highly customized, printed corrugate plus an insert that actually holds the glasses, plus information printed onto like a paper booklet. There's a lot of components going on in there. So it can be very hard to actually pull off a great experience from scratch by calling around and just talking to various partners. In a Lumi world, a brand can find us and sign on, and we have packaging engineers on our own team that can start working with us from idea, work through all the specifying of their packaging, and we handle all of the production through our network of manufacturers. So that is off their plate. The searching, the wondering, the comparing various quotes with no detail and data is all just completely removed from their plate, and they're managing that in the platform. So it's just a bit of a snippet on that.
And so then what happens? How does it get from there to the customer?
So most brands will sign on with a fulfillment partner. A 3PL is usually the kind of term used, and that stands for third-party logistics. And so that facility, they will have shipped all of their toothpaste to that 3PL facility, and that facility will be ready to ship it out to customers. And they're probably receiving the order data straight from the Shopify or whatever kind of e-commerce platform that brand decided to use. And so Lumi's packaging, the custom boxes and tissue paper and stickers and collateral that was produced through the Lumi platform, also lands at that 3PL, at that distribution center. So the product and the packaging kind of meet at that facility, and then that facility handles shipping out the shipments to actual customers. So that's the final step of the process. Lumi does not ship your packages out for you. Our aspect of the supply chain is just actually getting your packaging sourced and produced, and effectively meeting your product at the appropriate time at the DC, the distribution center.
And why wouldn't you take that part of the value chain though? Like full stack, bro?
Yeah. I mean, I think that becomes like a why wouldn't you do anything? Like, I think we discussed this a little bit last time, but like, why don't you configure all of your own servers? Like, why don't you do a lot of things in your business? Like, why use QuickBooks when you could use an Abacus? I don't know. Like, I think there's like a lot of, I'm being sassy, but there's like a lot of things in business where effectively working with a partner, and especially a software platform that actually gives you leverage, can help you move a lot faster. In our world specifically, there's 1,200 facilities across the US that can make a box. So when you start dialing to like find the right one for you, that's a lot of dials. And you're highly likely to end up working with a partner who doesn't own the right equipment or doesn't really make what you want. And going through batches of packaging is extraordinarily expensive for a brand. Like, an initial batch of packaging could cost a brand $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. And so you can't really afford to get it wrong. And then if you get it wrong, you would end up recycling what you produced. It's very wasteful. So it's a very important thing for the brand to get correct out the gate.
I think maybe to answer your question differently, Erik, it's just Lumi is also a startup, and we're trying to stay focused on what we do best. Being a 3PL is a whole different job. You have to build warehouses, employ people who are going to do the fulfillment and packing and shipping the products. So it's its own skill set, it's its own business model. And, maybe someday, never say never, we would do it. But right now it's just, we're really focused on making sure we nail the manufacturing side of things.
I think another quick point when you say like, why not go full stack? I think brands are choosing to take things in-house, but very intelligently selecting those things, right? So if you're running that toothpaste brand, maybe you have someone on your team who is like a formulation specialist, like a scientist. You want to focus your resources as a startup on what makes you truly unique. And I think it's fairly indisputable that like sourcing, not the design of the box, which can be unique, and we can help you with that too, but the sourcing of like where you produce a box at facility A, B, or C is not going to be the like secret sauce of your brand. So I think it's very important that startups focus on what makes them tick. And so that's why they, outsource elements of, whether it's email marketing or like other elements where there's a playbook for that. And I think there's not been a playbook for the physical aspects of supply chain, but it's kind of emergent.
Yeah. Are there a lot of unnecessary middlemen in this process? I guess if we were to sort of design it from first principles, what would that sort of process or supply chain look like? And I guess I'm curious, in a COVID world, is that sort of first principles redesigning going to happen, or what might that look like?
One of the things that we look at is some of the business models that exists in the world of packaging today. And traditionally, there's been really two major business models, distributors and manufacturers. So if you're looking for packaging, you're going to go to one of those two. Either you're going to find a packaging factory and start working with them. Now, packaging factories are super specialized. They are making one specific type of thing, like a box or tape or envelopes or stickers. Then you have distributors who try to simplify the experience by aggregating all of those different types of manufacturers and working directly with a customer. And so if you're a brand, you might go to a distributor, and it simplifies things because they already have relationships with the factories. They might be able to get you into factories that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get into. But when you work with them, they're a middleman. You lose some visibility over what's going on. You might not know which factories things are running with. You don't really understand what their decision process is. And so that's why Lumi is a marketplace business model. We're helping people understand in a very transparent way where things are running, but also get the benefit of knowing that they're always working directly with a manufacturer, being able to see exactly what the price from the manufacturer is, being able to compare different manufacturers, and kind of like eliminating a whole chunk of potential kind of in-between people that exist. And sometimes things can be subcontracted out multiple levels, and it can be really hard to see. So that's something that we're very cautious about when we're onboarding manufacturers onto the platform. We're really double checking that those are truly manufacturers and not trade companies that are representing a bunch of manufacturers.
Yeah, in a COVID world, I think that supply chain control and redundancy is even more at the forefront of brands' minds. So it kind of takes the wind out of the sails of like, I found one manufacturer locally who's doing a good job, or I found one manufacturer overseas who I heard from a friend is good. So I'll just roll with that. You can't really kind of just roll with things in this environment, because having a single point of failure is not acceptable in a supply chain. It's our position that it never has been, but I think that's becoming even clearer to folks. And what Stephan said is very true. Like, this is an industry that is filled with agencies, brokers, and distributors. The largest one did 8.6 billion in sales last year. So it's not like these are like 2-person agencies kind of like flying about brokering packaging. Like, brokering packaging is a massive business. And the reason why it can exist is because of that knowledge gap. People don't know what to order or who from. So a lot of people have been profiting on that opacity for decades.
What does COVID mean for just e-commerce in general? And I want to segue into, it's my understanding that 10% of retail spending is happening via e-commerce. And I'm curious as to why isn't it higher? What are the bottlenecks for that to be higher?
I think that, COVID, for some obvious reasons, like here we all are dialing in from home effectively on some version of house arrest, is a near-term boon for certain e-commerce verticals. What we're seeing across our customer base and prospect base for Lumi, which is all primarily e-commerce businesses, is that a lot of brands are experiencing a lift. Some categories are experiencing a drop-off or are kind of going all the way to zero. Categories that are effectively not able to be used at home, like maybe dress rental or something like that. People are not dressing up as they sit at home. So there's some categories suffering, but the net effect that we expect is that habitually there'll be a lot of folks who had previous inhibitions about ordering certain things online. Like, oh, I buy a lot of things online, but I don't buy shoes online, or I'll never buy a bathing suit online, or whatever, and I think that all of those kind of hurdles are being hopped through at hyper speed right now. Like, people are getting over their aversions very quickly. They're discovering new brands, and that will be very hard to unwind. I've had a thesis for a while that traditional CPG companies like the Colgates of the world and stuff have been underestimating younger people's lack of brand loyalty, that literally for generations, a family would be like a Colgate house. And then, now someone who's like in the early 20s is like, I've used 5 different toothpastes in the past year. They don't care. And they're discovering new things. I think that trend line will only increase. It'll be a tremendous opportunity, but it's quite vertical by vertical in the near term.
Yeah, I think the biggest category that's seeing a huge amount of behavioral change is grocery, because that's the category where, in the US at least, we're way behind other countries. Like, I think around 5% of grocery is bought online, whereas in the UK it's 30%. In China, you mentioned 10%. 10% of all retail counts certain categories that are not likely to move online, like gasoline, for example, which you're probably not going to buy direct-to-consumer gas for your car. But if you take those out, it's still only 16%, whereas in China, they're over 30% already. Categories like grocery, I think, are really fascinating because they're very behavioral. In the US, Walmart, Target, Costco, these are institutional behaviors. They're cultural behaviors. And even though Amazon's been making a lot of headway bringing shoppers online, the majority of Americans are still going to Walmart and Target and all those places to buy those types of products. And if they're forced to do that online, they're going to be experiencing some of the benefits of doing it that way for the first time.
You mentioned here that e-commerce has been growing sort of predictably over the last decade or so. What would need to be true for there to be a real step function or step increase in e-commerce's rise?
Well, I think something like a global pandemic works, but it's not necessarily what we were hoping for. I think that's the thing that is most likely to force behavioral change, I think.
Yeah.
There's other things that are more about the population of how the US functions, like geographically. We're a much lower density country than other countries. And a lot of states in the US don't have, I don't have the stats in front of me, but there's many cities in China that have 10 million plus inhabitants, whereas in the US, it's only a handful. So the logistics of e-commerce become stronger as you have more density. Same in the UK. They don't have the population of China, obviously, but they're a very dense country. So if I'm delivering mail or I'm delivering packages, it's much more efficient to do it in a city that has density than it is in the US. So that's something that's probably not going to change overnight, right? So maybe there's some technological changes. I know a lot of people are excited about different forms of drones that might like fly down to you or drive autonomously to you, and maybe that could like create some efficiencies. I don't know what time scale that's on, but those are some of the things that may need to change to make the price point more affordable.
Yeah. E-commerce is kind of associated with convenience in a lot of people's minds. And so there has to be a convenience tipping point. To Stephan's point, something that is kind of overlooked in that conversation about other countries' adoption of e-commerce kind of versus the US from just a straight numbers perspective is the amount of population living not in cities and in places where it isn't the most convenient option. And whenever something is not the most convenient option, it won't be used as much. So like if you have a store down the street and it's stocked with groceries, but when you order from Blue Apron or something, it takes like 7-10 days to get to you because of like your location, then it is not the most convenient option. And that's different when you're in a city. So I think that there's some interesting stuff there. But yes, in general, like huge world events like this that really challenge people's status quo habits is really what can drive compressing the timeline. I think the trend line of increasing e-commerce use and reliance was very strong anyway, but we could experience multiple years of like habit change, maybe even in months with something like this.
Yeah. I haven't left my house in months, not even COVID related.
That can't be true.
So when I talk to other venture capitalists, people are negative on D2C brands these days. I think Casper was sort of like what WeWork was for, I don't know, other non-tech related companies. Like Casper is sort of reminding people like, oh, it gets more expensive to acquire customers. Oh, these it's just a mattress. These things aren't that defensible. And I think negative on the category in general, and then also negative on sort of products that don't have a meaningful product innovation. Like it's not enough to have just a brand or distribution innovation. What's your take on both of those, particularly the paradigm of it has to be sort of differentiated product and also just on the category of D2C brands in general?
Well, I feel like this is where my viewpoint can depart from a VC's because when VCs get bummed about a certain category being fundable, it's about just whether they have access to those opportunities and whether startups starting like those opportunities from seed stage that they can fund will end up being successful. That is different than questioning whether the direct consumer model is thriving and will do well. Because I think that we're seeing a lot of traditional companies or companies with heritage products, meaning they've had a product for 30, 40, 50 years, starting a direct consumer model or like approaching the market in a different way. We have a customer that reminds me of that called the Spice House. The Spice House, I'm forgetting the exact year it was founded, but I don't think it's out of turn to say it's 50 plus years old as a company. And they have very recently like made significant investments into their direct to consumer business and it's thriving. So the VCs can't step in and fund that business. They don't need the funding, but that business is doing great. So I think when you're Lumi, we're lucky to have a portfolio strategy on e-commerce and on the direct-to-consumer model. That's not the same thing as only startups who are doing it. So I think that's a really important distinction that can get lost in the VC chatter. Another thing about those businesses in general, I think that you do, I would say that the product differentiation is important, but the differentiation of how the company markets itself and reaches its customers seems to be more important to me or to like the way I see the landscape, because like you could have a product that is not necessarily a game-changing product, but a really excellent community or a really excellent sales strategy or go-to-market strategy and kind of thrive. So I see that as a little bit more important than whether the product is just sort of like game changing. I mean, a lot of DTC companies are growing fast. In fact, we don't need to name names, but they don't have a game changing product exactly. They just have a really excellent community.
Yeah, I think that what Jesse mentioned about what is like VC fundable versus what is going to succeed as an overarching shift in the economy are two different things. I disagree that brands can't be the core differentiator. And also, I think that it can lead to VC-like, exits. I think Native Deodorants was a good example of that. RX Bar was a good example of that. Those companies didn't take a ton of VC money. Some of them were like bootstrapped than others. Yeah. So I think it's definitely possible. And I think brand as a differentiator is, especially right now, a generational thing. We're seeing a lot of, you've heard probably the phrase of this millennial aesthetic. And that's because there's this perception among a new generation of consumers who are, now in their 30s, but able to purchase products that they don't have affinity to the toothpaste, as Jesse mentioned. Like, they don't necessarily care about the Colgate brand. So there's an opportunity, and it comes once a generation. So there's going to be another one for Gen Z. And those, if you think that Gen Z is going to spend fewer dollars online than they are the millennials even, I would take that bet every day.
So you were talking about brand. Talk a little bit how we differentiate between sort of aggregators and brands in the sense of like, am I going to go to Amazon or Shopify or I don't know, Farfetched or something else, or am I going to go to sort of Casper's website or the individual DTC brand's website? How do you expect sort of aggregators and individual brands to evolve over time?
I think there's a huge problem there right now for direct to consumer, because we know that Amazon, the experience of using Amazon has degraded quite a bit over the past few years. I think especially as it relates to their marketplace strategy, allowing anyone to sell anything on Amazon has really, first of all, caused a lot of counterfeiting. It's caused, with situation like we have seen at COVID, like people have been marking up and hoarding these different supplies. Like, I think there was screenshots of Amazon where people were seeing like $400 for a bottle of Purell. This is all due to the kind of marketplace functionality that they've been building and now represents the bulk of their retail revenue. The reviews on the site are not trustworthy. So it's creating a big problem of trust on Amazon. But at the same time, Amazon is the most convenient option. People just naturally want to search there to find whatever product they need. Most of the companies that we serve at Lumi don't sell on Amazon, and their primary way of selling is through their own website. But that's very inconvenient if you have to buy from 30 different products on 30 different websites. So I think there's a huge opportunity for a company that is not brand hostile like Amazon tends to be, because they're like copycatting their own sellers, which is kind of crazy, gathering their data and trying to understand like what they're doing right so that they can make a white label version of that product. So I think that there's a huge opportunity for someone to enable more of that. Is it going to be Instagram? Is it going to be some other new company that doesn't exist yet? That's open. And then there's opportunities for sellers and platforms like Shopify. Shopify, one of the coolest things that they've rolled out is their payment platform, which really streamlines the checkout experience for anyone who's on Shopify. I can put in my phone number and then it will get my credit card information cross Shopify websites. So as a brand, I can still give my customer an experience that feels very native to me, but I get the benefit of the checkout being really fast and convenient. So I think there's a lot more opportunity in that area still.
Yeah. Do you remember conversational commerce? Or there was just this idea, product on itself. There was this idea that you were just going to see products either being written about or discussed in either social media or some media site like BuzzFeed, and then you were going to be able to purchase them. Do you have an opinion on that?
What was the promise of that in your mind?
Like we would be messaging you about some product or something, and it would recommend, oh, maybe you want this. Or like BuzzFeed would have a review for something or product on to be featured, and then it'd be like, oh, you might like that. Just making it way more native to buy shit.
I feel like we do see that. I don't know how different it is from a lot of the ways that we think about advertising and paid content in general. Like, I think it sounded like a bold concept that would be somehow different than paid placement and like influencer marketing and stuff. But I don't think at the end of the day it is that different. Like I think that we are all hopping off of more sources into a product experience. So like I will find myself on a new e-com brand's website because I am scrolling through Instagram, or I'm reading an article or something from a friend, and like it's kind of there. That is kind of part of what you're discussing. But I just think it just isn't maybe that revolutionary. Maybe it sounded like it would be this whole different way to shop, and it really is just it's just like discovering products through all the ways, like through all the things that you look at in the world, which is, I guess at this point, maybe that was a bold idea sometime, but it just feels normal now.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a business model challenge there, because I mean, the traditional way you would do that is through affiliate sales. And I feel like we haven't closed the gap around the experience of affiliate sales. Like maybe there's a way where there would be like a one-click button that you could embed on your Product Hunt website or something like that would allow me to instantly purchase that thing. But that would assume that all of the brands kind of have that already. It's a little tricky from an experience standpoint to solve that in a way that feels like really easy for everyone and still gets the attribution back to like the aggregator.
I do think that going back one second, I do think that we will see someone crack the code of product discovery for new brands, like some probably non-Amazon company that has enough weight and enough kind of traffic and attention of its own, and that will tip the scales in favor of a whole new crop of direct-to-consumer brands that are more fundable and are kind of more in the startup ilk that we got familiar with the past 5 years. I don't know exactly what form that will take, but it does seem like such a massive opportunity that it will be figured out, because it is not sustainable to make these upstart companies compete on kind of just Facebook and Google ad spend for people to learn that they exist. And people want to know they exist. Like people want to know of the new supplement company, new bra company, and like what is the best toothpaste for a toddler with a certain health condition. Like people are searching all of this stuff. And I think that product discovery will get solved in some way, or will get made better. And we will see a whole new crop of companies emerge off the back of that. I just can't pinpoint exactly how it will happen.
Yeah. Let's, after all, this is a VC podcast. Let's pretend we were running a VC fund focused on e-commerce broadly. We talked a little bit about D2C. Let's talk about sort of e-commerce enablement or infrastructure broadly. Let's say we were running it. Where would we be excited to invest, or what do we think are opportunities for new startups to build something meaningful? Perhaps, Stephan, let's start with you.
Well, I think the discovery problem we just talked about is a great one. I think there's a lot of options to solve that problem. I'd be curious to see if that can be solved in kind of a meta way through browser-based functionality. Like, we saw the acquisition of Honey from PayPal, a few months ago. I think there's a lot with the browser that can be done via plugins. I'd be very curious about that. There's a lot going on with the supply chain, distribution, returns type of thing. One of the things that I've been talking a lot about on my podcast, plug right now, Well Made, check it out, is repair. And I think that a lot of brands have been very successful around closing the loop and selling products that are either have a lifetime guarantee or have a repair guarantee. And how could we enable repair as a service? That's an area that I'm really fascinated about, because if we could solve for that, we could enable companies and consumers to think about the products they buy as something that is a longer lifespan, rather than buying a lot of cheap crap. I think off the top of my head.
As a VC, I think that's something I would be thinking about as I look at kind of infrastructure companies. The trend line does seem very strong that a lot of e-commerce brands and direct-to-consumer companies will be growing off of the back of a lot of services and a lot of infrastructure-related things that they will need to work with and to patchwork quilt together to build the companies. And I think Lumi fits into that trend. But something that I would advise is ask look deeply into whether each possible solution applies to e-commerce as a channel, and whether it is bolstered with the growth of e-commerce, or whether it applies to direct-to-consumer business models more specifically as they exist right now. Because the latter would be a weaker position. E-commerce trendline feels quite inevitable. Direct-to-consumer businesses, how they grow and scale, we're talking about some of the letdowns of, things like Casper, etc. Those things are bound to morph and change. So some of the most successful e-commerce growth verticals and companies might be, in a look different than they have for the past 5 years. So thinking about the difference in e-commerce as a channel and direct-to-consumer as a model, I think is helpful when you evaluate possible investments.
Well, I think the one big one that is struggling right now, but I still think it's a good idea, is retail as a service. Because I think a lot of companies are looking at how can they set up showrooms or small experiences that allow them to kind of put their toes out in the physical world. And if I'm a furniture brand or fashion or some sunglasses or food or something that you want to see or test or try in the real world. Neighborhood goods, beta, some different companies have been trying that. Obviously, right now they're shut down, which is really sad, but I still think that's a good idea, and I'd like to see them explore that. And I would be really curious if you're thinking 5 to 10 years down the road, how does that overlap with harder tech problems? Things like delivery type of drones, delivery technologies. I think that's really fascinating. I think we need to reinvent the mailbox. I think there's a wide open opportunity for mailbox that would be, I don't know, we've tried the notion of Amazon lockers, but how do we bring that into apartment buildings, into communities where we need bigger places? We need these mini mail rooms, receiving centers to arrive for all these packages to arrive. How can we solve for that? And also, I just saw with the new iPad that came out a few months ago, they're doing a ton with augmented reality, and it's getting pretty good. It's actually surprisingly good now that they've got the LiDAR stuff. You can just pop a piece of furniture into your house and everything is scaled appropriately. Maybe, 5 to 10 years from now, that becomes a normal experience for people to play around with. So there are some things that are more tech enablers kind of 5 to 10 years down the road that I think will I don't know which one of all of those will work, but one of them will work for sure.
Yeah. If you're building, anyone listening to this is building Warby Parker for mailboxes, blank check.
I'm not saying we're going to sell mailboxes. I'm saying the mailboxes need to be, somehow there's a business of kind of taking the locker concept and selling it to real estate developers.
It goes to the bigger question of what are the ending ripple effects in our real world that need to change, and what opportunities come from that. So in real estate, new building design for apartment complexes literally has different structural elements to take into account, that you might have 300 units and they all have 3 or 4 packages every day that need to get distributed, and people don't want to be tripping over them in hallways. So there's really big changes kind of coming down the pipeline that ripple all the way through to real estate, architecture. So there's opportunities throughout that kind of whole chain, but spotting exactly which ones, of course, will work is always the difficult part.
I want pneumatic tubes. I don't know if we can get there.
Okay, that's so off topic.
Do you know that? Well, in Paris, they had the entire mail system there was all pneumatic tubes. Now, it only works for envelopes, right? Small things, but I feel like we should come back to that. Probably in China, they'll do that in one of the cities, and it'll be so efficient and great.
Yeah, let's do a whole separate episode just on that.
Cool.
I'm down.
Let's take an example of we see something like Allbirds, or see something like House, or see something like Casper or Bonobos. I don't know, back in the day. What frameworks would you advise, or would you use if you were venture capitalists analyzing sort of these D2C products in terms of their ability to potentially be venture outcomes? What are the questions you'd be making sure to ask?
Well, I guess my answer would not be particularly surprising. I think the categories that are easy wins are the ones that are repeat purchases that people have to make. So that's where those shaving products or a lot of the subscription type of things that have been successful are easy to like pick out. And if a company is able to put together the right team and a great brand and sell that thing, I think that can be successful. But
what about like shoes or pants?
Well, yeah, and that's where it gets a lot harder. I think that some ways that companies have done a good job with that has been audience first brands is a really fascinating area that is emerging. I mean, I think Glossier is probably the best example of that, that has like reached a certain scale, but now you're seeing it happening on a smaller scale with a ton of influencers, whether they're on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok or whatever, selling merch. Do some of those influencers who started a product line become entrepreneurs and take their audience with them and actually build something meaningful as a product line as opposed to just merch? I think that's an interesting area. I wonder if that has like a venture-backed model. Glossier certainly seems to have done pretty well in that respect. I don't feel like I have a great answer to this.
Okay, let me try something. So I think another way to one jump in point on this is actually looking at the traditional competitors that the brands are kind of up against and making sure you feel comfortable with the capital efficiency of that brand, like to date, and then also to get to a certain scale where they're actually eating market share from their traditional competitors. And I think a great example of a positive version of that is something like Native, where there's a lot of ways that they could have spent money. Like they probably could have raised more and spent more, but they were quite conservative and capital efficient, and they're able to have an exit to P&G that was very positive for the investors in the team. Now, but they could have done it differently. Like, so every vertical has to be analyzed for what the market can bear for that vertical. And I think that's where people are losing sight. They're actually porting the thinking from one deodorant company over to a vitamin company and then over to a bra company without enough attention paid to how that bra company will be viewed amongst other traditional bra companies when it needs to either merge, get acquired, be sold, or in a cool outcome eventually go public. It'll still have to be compared to those comps. And I think too little attention is being paid to that. There's like this assumption that every e-com company, no matter what it sells, is like somehow the same, and it's just not true. So that would be something I dig into quite a bit.
Yeah, I think maybe one way to look at it is you need to, going back to what you were saying earlier about you can't just innovate on brand, you have to have something else. I do think it's helpful to have, 2 or 3 of the following things. Like having a good brand is really helpful. Having some sort of product innovation or technology that's inherent to your product that's unique on the market. Having a business model innovation, like can you sell something via subscription or on a lifetime warranty or something like that makes your product differentiated in the market? Or do you have a special, you've put together an audience somehow that allows you to sell your product? And if you have 2 or 3 of those things, you're ahead. If you have only one, it might be less defensible.
So two areas I've seen companies pitch us recently. One is around sort of secondary marketplace for returns, or really trying to figure out that problem that relates to your sustainability idea. I'm curious where you see sort of a wedge there, what you think about that space. And then the second one is basically a company that is trying to dynamically price goods that sort of solves for the secondary transaction problem as it relates to things like Yeezys. When Kanye West releases a shoe and there's only 100 available, people buy it and then sell it for a much higher price, and they're trying to dynamically price it such that the creator receives the benefit from sort of people wanting it, or buying it early, wanting it more instead of some secondary marketplace. What are your thoughts on either of those ideas?
Well, on the secondary and secondhand and market, we've talked to a lot of companies on the Well Made podcast about this. ThreadUp, Poshmark. We've talked a little bit about Depop also. I think this is a really fascinating area and it's growing quite fast. One of the questions that I've been asking them is, are they able to track not just the second hand, but third hand? What happens if that product is able to live through multiple ownerships over time? And is that something that they can track? I think there's a fascinating sustainability story around that. But there's also something that is changing behaviorally among consumers. All of those companies, for this might sound funny, but the Marie Kondo Netflix show had a huge impact on their business. They all saw a big bump when that came out at some point last year. And so there is this mindset occurring that I hope this will stick, and I hope that consumers will think about it more. And so ThredUp has now started to turn their secondhand market into more of a marketplace dynamic. Now, it would be interesting to see if a company can build business model starting from the ground up with just that idea. But essentially what ThredUp is doing is allowing other brands to use their return logistics to offer store credit to their customers. So, for example, if I'm going on the website of Bonobos, let's just say, since you mentioned them before, and I decide I want to resell my Bonobos, I don't want to wear those, shirts or pants or anything anymore. If I was partnering with ThredUp, they would allow me to give those pants and shirt back to ThredUp. ThredUp will resell it and give me basically a discount code that I can use back on Bonobos. So that whole ecosystem seems like something that could really work. The hard part is building all of those return logistics. That is something that ThredUp has spent years building. And I know Jesse's been in their facilities. It's a quite impressive thing.
Those facilities are extremely impressive. I think that kind of comes back to something else we were discussing, which is being able to play an operational element for brands can be a key element of whether some of these infrastructure ideas relating to e-commerce work or are very how hard it is to onboard a brand to using it. So I think that this becomes something to think about in venture, because there's this sort of allure in venture to having something be software only, super scalable, obviously a lightweight team, lightweight, capital expenditures. Some of those companies that try to go completely software only could find themselves beat out or having to merge or work with someone who actually is doing some of that work. So in ThredUp's case, it's cool that they're using an asset that they have, and it's not just a physical asset. Their facilities have a lot of technology that they custom built into them, something that I was very impressed by is their ability to photograph thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of things extremely quickly. They pull things out of a bag and they have these really beautiful photography setups because they have to post immense amounts of inventory very quickly. It's an unprecedented amount of photography that you need to do to run a business like that. So when you're set up to do that, now you can sell other secondhand things. But again, you have to be set up to do that. People want to see the photograph of the real thing that they're buying when it's secondhand. So you can't just use the stock photograph that you pull from the website. You can, but now people are wary. People want further description. So there's just a lot of thought around how do you actually make that behavior possible? How do you make the brand on board? How do you make the consumer comfortable? And I think a lot of that has some operational legwork to do that some startups just getting started could overlook.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest challenges if I was starting a startup in this area today is that there's really strong network effects. And so one of the benefits that ThredUp has is that they have an ability to then sell that product, right? If I'm Bonobos, again, I don't necessarily have a marketplace to sell my secondhand products, or if I'm starting a brand new startup that is in the business of receiving secondhand products and reselling them, now I have to build the demand for that secondhand product. So that part can be quite challenging, but I think there's a lot of interesting technology problems that could be solved in this area, especially around, like you were mentioning, pricing, potentially machine learning or artificial intelligence. We have so much progress happening right now around computer vision. Is there something where I can take what Jesse's describing about the infrastructure that ThredUp built on the photography side and use that as an input to price or to sort or to do something with that product and make sure that it gets to the right person at the right price.
As more and more of commerce goes online, how should we think about who are the losers here? Like, is Walmart the next Sears, or like how do we who are the losers here?
I think Walmart's going to be okay. And I heard that I don't follow this closely enough, I guess, but I know that Target had like a banner year last year and was doing really well. So I think that some of those entrenched players are going to continue to do well. I think where we're seeing a lot of companies struggle is the companies that are really selling in malls, and malls is continuing to be a really difficult channel. I think that a lot of the, JC Penney's and Macy's, and so those more discount
Forever 21, yeah.
Forever 21.
Yeah, mall. I agree completely. The mall-based brands that are like that's where a majority of their sales came from, that don't have a strong enough brand or product differentiation to really be successful online, is a very that's a really rough place to be. And then I think there's other CPG companies that may have rolled forward with brand, kind of like generational brand value, that don't have, maybe they aren't actually selling a really excellent product, and they could be unseated. They could be unseated in the kind of years and decades to come. Which some of them are really large, and I think some of these things like are kind of basic. Like I don't, this is not a prediction exactly, but it's like bleach. Like we all buy Clorox bleach. Like, they have a really strong supply chain for that. But it's not like, how complicated is that product? It's a chemical product. Like potentially we all get hooked on another type of product, or we all stop using that product and switch over to a more, sustainable cleaning product. And so we see something like that was just a mainstay just kind of go by the wayside, or experience a significant loss in market share. I think all of that's very possible.
So Stephan, you have this fantastic podcast, Well Made. Stephan, what have you learned from, you've interviewed over 100 e-commerce entrepreneurs. What have you learned from people who do a great job of either distribution or community, from those who only do a okay job at it? Like what's something really innovative some entrepreneurs are doing that you've seen? Yeah,
the podcast is called Well Made, and the interviews are roughly like 80% founders, 15% journalists and kind of meta experts who are involved in the space, and then 5% is just like random people that are friends of mine. I haven't invited you yet, I guess, Erik. I don't know. You shouldn't feel bad about that. You'll be on soon. But I think that the thing that I've been really fascinated about is changing the patterns of consumption. And so I think the companies that we tend to feature that have really interesting things are ones that think more towards these concepts of circularity. How do we actually think about how the product, from the earliest point in its beginnings all the way to where it ends, can be rethought? We've had companies like Blueland. Blueland is this, they're competing in the CPG space, and they're selling these like cleaning products where now that you are not limited by the fact that your product needs to sit on a shelf in a retail store, in a grocery store, and take up all the space so that visually it has prominence and people want to buy it. How does that change the packaging? And they're making all of their products water free. You can just add the water to this cleaner when you receive it at home. So there's a whole category of products, especially in this area, that are wide open for innovation, because the incentives that existed in the retail world were all about packaging as a mechanism to sell the customer. The website can do that now. You don't have to do that. So there's this convergence of primary and secondary packaging coming together. So that's like a whole area that we're exploring. And there's been several companies in that space. And amazingly, actually, like Amazon has been really pushing that direction, because it helps them if products are ready to ship right away. So other themes that we've been exploring are things like durability or repair that I mentioned before. With durability, one of the other aspects that I've been really fascinated by is the idea of cost per wear or cost per use. If you're someone who shops in malls or in most fashion nowadays is sold through this kind of fast fashion model like H&M and Zara and those types of companies, there are companies that are rethinking that from the perspective of cost per wear. How much is it going to cost you to wear this shoe if you wear it every day for the next 2 to 5 years instead of something that's only durable enough to last for, a month or a year, but is made in a much cheaper way. So there's a lot of these themes around what does it mean for something to be well made that we're trying to explore. And hopefully these companies are sowing the seeds of like the future economy that is much more in tune with the environment and responsibility that we have to shift capitalism towards something more sustainable.
On that note, I want to talk about some of the things that you've launched recently. Marketplace, Lumi ID, and Slash Packaging. And my understanding is that they have to do with supply chain control, scaling ops teams, and sustainability. So why don't you unpack the problems and how your products help solve them?
I think that one interesting one to kind of dwell on for a sec is Lumi ID is our first actual consumer facing launch. So we're very B2B. Like our company is B2B. Our customers are brands who are these e-commerce brands. So we don't have a consumer facing element to the company. But Lumi ID is actually a code and it's typically expressed as a QR code that brands can put on their packaging. They can generate it seamlessly through the platform. It actually is attached to the specification and ordering data that is in the platform. And it goes on the piece of packaging. So the poly bag or the box. When that item ships to the end user, so it could be you, Erik, you get that item on your doorstep, you pick it up. When you scan that code, it has information about the specification of that item. You can find out what the recycled content of the item is, what it's made out of, where it was produced, whatever the brand is kind of game to share. So there's a lot of transparency there. And then the other element is it can tell you based on your geography, where you're standing right then, how to recycle that item. Disposal and recyclability are like end of life for the packaging is extremely important. So often brands go to a lot of effort to make their packaging better or more sustainable. But what does it matter if you kind of adopted a compostable bag, let's say, compared to a non-compostable bag, but no one knows that, or they don't know how to compost it or where to go, what the local facility is that can help them? Then that is sort of like wasted effort in a sense. So we're really trying to connect those dots all the way from when the brand made decisions upstream about where to produce something or what it's made out of, all the way to the consumer holding it and actually doing that thing, like recycling it, disposing of it properly, taking it to the right facility. So that feels pretty exciting. I think that it kind of really connects the decision making all the way through the end of the chain. And ultimately, if we all as kind of humans want to see the packaging around us start to have a lower impact on the world, we have to take those final steps of getting it to the proper disposal or recycling center, etc.
Yeah, and it ties back to the marketplace, because what we're trying to do on the marketplace side is help brands make decisions that are not purely based on price. So one funny thing is that actually most of the time more sustainable choices end up being more cost effective, because the most sustainable choice you can make is using less stuff. And so that tends to be also the most cost effective choice. But in the process of sourcing a piece of packaging, choosing the right kind of product, choosing the right kind of factory, oftentimes this gets reduced to rows in a spreadsheet where all you see is what is my unit price. And what we're trying to surface in the interface is helpful information that helps you choose between different factories that might be at the same cost, but actually one is so much closer to your distribution center that it completely reduces the carbon emissions from the freight. Or maybe one of them has solar panels on their roof and actually can manufacture that product using renewable energy. And you wouldn't see that if you were just looking at it on a spreadsheet. But now as a brand, you have that extra information that allows you to make better choices. And that ends up rippling all the way down to Lumi ID, which is the consumer-facing QR code that allows your customer as a brand to scan and find out how to dispose of that item, but also how you made your choices around the manufacturers that you picked. And the reason that's important is that is the fastest growing category of customer service inquiries that e-commerce brands have to deal with. If you go to any of your favorite e-commerce brands and you go to their Instagram or their Facebook page and you look at their most recent post, you will see people who are asking this question. They're saying, hey, why is this made out of plastic? Why is this recyclable? How do I deal with this? These are an emerging problem for a lot of customer service teams that are struggling to explain it. It's hard to explain. It's very nuanced. For meal kit delivery companies, the number one reason people churn is because of packaging. And so we're trying to help both the supply chain managers within these brands make better choices, but also communicate them in the best way they can back to their customers. And packaging. Oh, go ahead, Jesse.
Well, I just want to say that I think that concept of better choices getting made is really, really critical. Something that I reflect on a lot as just as a person is like, it is pretty remarkable how much effort has been put into consumer choice these days. Like, we have an extremely high expectation as consumers of what information we should have access to when making a purchasing decision. Like, when it relates to our health, like, we expect that every single ingredient to be broken down for us, that the origins of the ingredients should be broken down for us. Like, we're just going to spend like $20 on a bottle of vitamins, and we expect like a fidelity of information that would have been unheard of, like, several years ago. And I think that B2C trends, like that kind of consumer trend, is flowing into B2B. Like, it kind of should blow our minds that that person spending $20 at home expects like complete transparency about what they're ordering. But then when that same person goes into work, and let's say they work in procurement, they're going to place an order for $500,000 of raw materials coming from China, and they have access to a lot less information. Think about that. Like, why would they be comfortable spending $20 and they need all this information to feel comfortable making that purchase? But when they get to work, they're fine spending $500,000 without the information. The reality is that they're not fine. It's uncomfortable, but there isn't enough technology to address that problem. So I think that kind of slide of B2C, like consumer expectations sliding into B2B, is another kind of macro thing to think about, because consumer expectations are changing really fast and taking kind of slightly too long to reach the B2B space.
What would be good to talk about that we didn't get to talk about?
I want to give a plug to Slash Packaging, because that's a fun little thing. One small thing that we just launched, and it's around the Earth Day. I don't know if anyone tracks this. For me, I think it's like the best holiday ever invented, but 2020 is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. In 1970, after we first put people on the moon, they started to look back at Earth and thought, hey, this is a precious place. We should take care of it. And so that was one of the inspirations behind Earth Day. And I think it's a really awesome holiday type of, or it's an amazing idea for a worldwide event that we can all get behind. One of the things that we decided to launch for Earth Day is an initiative called /packaging.org. And the idea behind it is to get brands, e-commerce companies, and anyone who really wants to be a part of it to put a page on their website at yourbrand.com/packaging that explains your commitment to making sustainable choices around your packaging. And even if you're just trying to figure this out and you haven't completely figured out, just being transparent about what you've done so far and where you want to improve in the future, what kind of materials you're using, what guides your process, what are your priorities. If you have numbers or stats, some companies are already publishing those on sustainability pages, but we want to standardize, just like everyone has a /about page, a /packaging page could help your customers find out what you're doing about this particular issue. And we've created a directory at /packaging.org of any companies. It doesn't have to be Lumi customers, any companies who are taking that on and being transparent about their choices.
Totally. I have a couple more questions. I'm seeing like these Shopify for X businesses, like Shopify for beauty creators or sort of other independent creators. Is Shopify like a winner take all, or are we going to see, other sort of sub-aggregators get to meaningful scale?
I think we will see some successful companies that support specific verticals, either purely from a software perspective or from a software and operational perspective. The ones that kind of get my interest particularly have an operational component as well, in a similar way to how Lumi does secondary packaging, secondary custom packaging. So it means we can work across all e-com verticals, like we could sell to a candy company or to a lingerie company. In a similar way, you can enjoy the benefits of deep expertise and scale by, let's say, supporting all of the like pharmaceutical related direct-to-consumer startups, but not just supporting them with software, but also maybe you are running a formulation house, you have an in-house scientist, or just like a level of support and like actually kind of get to market and scalability that someone like Shopify couldn't do because they wouldn't go as deep in the expertise or the operational support or the specific software that vertical would need. Some of these, when you think about it, if you just look at an individual industry like pharmaceuticals or like personal care, like each industry is definitely large enough to support a really key player who's developing great technology or operational expertise, assuming that they can get to scale. So that is the big question. Do they have enough kind of secret sauce of their own? But it's a cool model. And I don't think that I also don't think it's mutually exclusive. Like you might see some of those companies kind of using the Shopify API, or like it depends what they try to make their like totally unique proprietary software. But I like that specialization.
Yeah. We saw businesses that really tried to sort of disrupt Procter & Gamble, like Brandless and Walker and Company, not achieve their goals. Why is that the case? And do we think we're going to see sort of businesses like that disrupt PG in a meaningful way?
I think that I think that when you go out to market and you're like, I'm going to disrupt a multi-billion-dollar company that took, hundreds of years or whatever, like decades to get to where it was. And when you research the history of those companies, they didn't say that. They didn't launch with 12 different flag brands and stuff. They grew over time. I just think, I think that was sort of the venture industry and some of those folks getting hopped up on like the storytelling of like why it was super investable. I don't think it was kind of a real story from the beginning. I don't know if I'm kind of being too negative, but I think that the concept of Brandless was like, what if everything can be, $2 or $3? And that doesn't even strike me as like a core disruptor to Procter & Gamble or anything. So that kind of seems like it was people getting hopped up on their own stories and the funding of these businesses. But I just think in general, good businesses will be grown off the back of a strong product, strong sales, companies that will end up having a meaningful disruption on a company like Procter & Gamble will take over entire product categories with like significant market share over time. It won't be overnight. It won't be them attacking them on all verticals at once. It just, I don't know, just seems kind of obvious that won't be how it happens. But I guess, that's just one perspective.
I think it's interesting when you look at the verticals that a company like Procter & Gamble or Unilever operates in. Some of the more profitable ones have been the first ones that were successful direct-to-consumer businesses, and shaving comes to mind as a good example of that was able to scale up quickly. But there are very niche brands that have been established over the course of 50 or 80 years that are within their portfolio, like the shoe shine product. And I don't think it's going to necessarily be a successful direct-to-consumer to go out there and be saying, we are the direct-to-consumer like shoe shine cream. Maybe it will, I don't know. But there are dozens and dozens of categories that are somewhere deep into the portfolio of these like big CPGs. And it's really curious to me what will happen with those. Because I do think that if I flash forward 20 years into the future, there's going to be a way that people buy that thing online. Maybe it's just going to be through Amazon, but I do feel like P&G and Unilever and those types of companies will need to make their way to a direct-to-consumer model. Will they be able to do it themselves? I don't know. It'd be interesting.
I am kind of bullish or excited about the products that challenge the CPG categories in general, not with a competitive product, but with a replacement that's different, because it offers a supply chain benefit as well. So like something I think about is like, Colgate, like they own massive toothpaste plants. Like they're achieving incredible economies of scale. So when you work with a contract manufacturer to make your toothpaste, it's very hard to compete with them on price. But let's look at a counterpoint to that. Product, that his brand here in LA that I love called Bite toothpaste. Bite toothpaste is challenging the concept of toothpaste in tubes with toothpaste tablets, more sustainable, less packaging, really like different behavior. So that they have a behavior thing to overcome there. But if that takes off, then Colgate is not at an advantage. Like they don't have tablet factories like ready to roll necessarily. Like it's a whole new category. And while Bite builds up its supply chain expertise, its formulation expertise, then the old school competitor will actually be like caught like not up to speed. So you're not meeting them where they are. Like you're just redefining a category. That excites me as well.
Are there other examples where you've seen that?
What else, Stephan, is like that? Like where someone is redefining a category. Oh, I've got more like there's a shampoo one. Like a lot of them fit into the trend of sustainability as well. Like there's a shampoo and conditioner bar that I use called High Bar. And like it's an actual solid bar. So like, are they competing in the world of like Suave and Tresemme and like some, the big shampoo brands? Like, sure, but they're doing it. They're creating a product that is so different that again, the filling factories and the formulation factories that the big CPGs have can't make the bar and not in the same way. So you're just kind of going after them on uneven ground and changing people's habits, which I think is a better stance, like a better competitive footing for a startup.
Well, if you thinking of shampoo makes me think of Function of Beauty, who they do completely personalized shampoo. So that's another avenue where if I were a big CPG brand trying to rejigger my whole factory to enable that, that could be quite challenging. Function of Beauty does this thing where you answer this questionnaire and they make a formulation for you and every bottle is unique. So they've designed their whole fulfillment and manufacturing process around being able to produce one single bottle of shampoo that is like designed for you. And that concept of mass personalization, if it becomes successful, could be quite disruptive. And it would be interesting to see if CPG companies can adapt to that, because they're not really set up to sell those products since they sell through retail channels.
Another example would be like Madison Reed. Madison Reed kind of bringing home hair color to a direct to consumer experience. Hair color is another kind of established consumer vertical. It's been sitting on shelves for a very long time. I'm sure it has a very solid supply chain, etc. But the experience of doing it at home with a custom kit is a benefit. It's actually a consumer benefit to have all the kind of accoutrements in the box, and the box has a great guided experience. And you don't have to go to the store and check out and like have the checkout lady look at you, or checkout fella look at you and be like, oh, you dye your hair. So you're just kind of cutting out a lot of things that are kind of nice to cut out. And so it isn't a fundamentally different product, but it is a fundamentally different experience, which kind of again puts the traditional CPG competitor at they're on a footing there of like a bit less stable, because it's harder for them to just go at you where you are. Take Hims and Rowe and other companies as another kind of example where there's just things that are kind of unpleasant to buy online, or haven't been available, or aren't available at your typical drugstore, and you need like you need actually like doctor telemedicine to kind of get approved to buy. Those things are also kind of great and are hard for a traditional CPG company to just kind of replicate your experience, because your experience is an online quiz or is consultation or involves a staff of doctors who can speak to you on the phone or video. Like that is not the same as just like putting goop into a bottle, right? Like now the brand has a lot more as a competitive advantage.
Okay, my guests today have been Jesse, Genet and Stephan Ango. Jesse, Stephan, any last plugs you want to make sure people check out? Well Made, the podcast, certainly.
I host a YouTube video series about packaging. I do an unboxing series where I unbox brands and only talk about the boxes, like give you an overview of what their boxing experience is like and how they did it. So I think that's my only plug.
I'm going to plug Jesse's Twitter. I think Jesse Genet on Twitter is worth a follow. It's very the signal to noise ratio is very good, and she's got a very funny Twitter persona, so I like.
It's all about quality. Don't tweet a lot.
Unboxing things. Check out Jesse's show. Go to /packaging.org if you have companies that you like to shop from and you want to know what they're doing with their packaging. Tweet at them, Instagram them, tell them to join /packaging.org.
Cool. Awesome. It's a wrap. I'll let you guys go. Thank you both for joining. That was a lot of fun.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.